Hi, here is my elephant dream catcher, which I made with stained glass methods using wire, beads, flat glass, glass globes, and crystals and shells. Here I have a list of materials that I will talk about during this video. You can get all of these materials at Amazon or AliExpress or Hobby Lobby or other craft stores. Some of them come on and off availability. I usually collect different stuff as I'm going, and then I'll be all ready. I like to have different gauges of bare copper wire to work with. For this project, I used mainly 26, 14, and 22 gauge. First of all, I drew a little sketch of what I wanted my elephant to look like. And I did it to the scale of what I wanted it to be. I'm using 14 gauge bare copper wire, and with needle nose pliers, I'm bending the wire to go along with the sketch that I drew. Now I put the piece of paper on top of an old cardboard box that I had, so I had something to squish the thumbtacks into. So as you see, it's pretty soft wire, but it does hold its shape very nicely, which is why I like the 14 gauge for this. I want to have a nice outline to work off of. So I want the wire to be pretty flat against the drawing on its own, but I do use the thumbtack push pin things to hold it in place while I'm working, as you can see. And you don't have to follow your drawing exactly if you don't want to. It's your drawing. So just use it as a guide. So I'm going to end up soldering all these pieces of wire together. So I have to figure out where the ends of the wires are going to be. And I decided right at his tusk there will be a good ending point. Now I'll do a little bit more, a little bit faster, and you can see that you just build one from the other until you have a complete shape. And this is what I ended up with. Now I soldered every joint where the two wires meet. And then I added a bunch of beads to it to help with the decoration. And this is what it looked like after I soldered it and then turned. This is the back side, and then I resoldered the back to help make it as strong as I could. And then I used 22 gauge bare copper wire and wrapping it around a round marker that I had. I used that. I'll be using that later on. These are some of the glass pieces that I used in the project. The square pieces, I bought some mosaic tiles of translucent glass and foiled them. You can cut your flat glass for that if you want to. This right here is a drawing that I did on the computer, and I'm putting it under a piece of clear silicone. And that way I can do my soldering work and I can still see the arrays and line up everything pretty accurately so that I have a symmetrical project at the end. Right now I'm using those green glass globs and the yellow ones and putting them between some purple flat glass. And I'm just lining it up, making sure that everything is pretty much where I want it to go, because when I start soldering, I don't want to have to choose and change too many things. So here it is getting ready to solder. You can see that they're just spaces right now. And that those loops around the outside, I'm going to do that after I'm done with the flat area. So I'm using a gel flux right now, but then I thought, you know, this is just going to take forever to flux all these spots. So I got out a spray bottle that I had filled with a liquid flux and just kind of sprayed the whole area. Sometimes I still had to add a little bit more flux, but this was a pretty easy way to flux everything. Now using my 4060 tin lead water soluble solder, I am soldering all the foils together, filling in any gaps. Those gaps around all the stones I'm filling with solder. So when I put the stones out, I knew that they weren't going to fit perfectly. So the glass globs were just going to have to be what they are. Yeah, there were a few times when I did cut a glass glob to make it fit, but most of the time I tried to find one that already fit the bill and I could just fill it with solder. Make sure you don't leave your solder iron on the foil for very long, because if you foil the stuff the way I did it, it just barely reaches around the glass shapes. So you don't have all that much to hang on to. So you want to make sure that the foil doesn't release. Oops, I forgot one right there, didn't I? Doesn't release from the. See, I have to add another yellow glob because I forgot one. You don't want the foil to release from the glass globs. See, that's why it's better if you can get them all filled in before you start soldering, because then you don't have to change your mind and stop everything you're doing. Yeah, these filing techniques of filling in the gaps does not make a really smooth stained glass look. So I knew that coming on with it, that this would be to be a little bit chunky. So that triangle right there that I was soldering, that was a square, mosaic square that I then cut so that it would fit in that spot. So I have some purple, some yellow, and some green of the squares. I like it best when I think of a color scheme that's not too huge. I don't want to have every color of the rainbow in a project usually. So this project has purple, green, and yellow. Those, you could see those red circles down at the bottom of the page. Those are silicone washers, which are great because you can use them to hold your crystals, which is what I'm soldering right there. Crystals generally are pointy on both ends, so they don't lie flat. But if you put them over a washer and the pointy stuff part goes down into the washer and it holds it up, and then everything's level and you can solder it pretty easily. And yes, those crystals are very minimally foiled on the edges. They just barely overlap the edges. So you really need to be nice to them and not heat the foil up too much, and be prepared that if I have to replace one because it falls out, it's not the end of the world. So I am putting each one down. I'm kind of making a odd assortment going around the edges, I guess I'd call it, of the purple, green, yellow, and then I have some that are a little bit clear that I'm using around the edges. And I'm going to back solder all this stuff, so that'll help hold it together too. So see, once now and then I'll put a washer to help hold them up. And I just bought an assortment of silicone washers. Later on, I used some of the clear ones that came with the assortment, these little clear ones. But for these larger crystals, the red ones that I have work great. So when you're making your loops with the wire, just find something round to wrap around to make your loops that's going to fit the crystals that you have. Because crystals come in all different sizes. And I like the crystals to just sit on the wire circles. That way they're easy to solder on. I have in the past sometimes made them like fit inside the circle. That works also, but then you really need to have a washer under each one. That black thing that I'm using is a probe that I bought on Amazon. It's just very handy to kind of tap stuff in place with. Now when I'm done, here I am turning it over and back soldering everything. Because once you solder from one side, you get all these globs of solder that kind of sink through your project. And I like to flatten them all down and make sure all the little holes are filled up and there's no gaps. And back soldering also makes it stronger. That one right there fell out. All its foil kind of fell out. So actually, in this instance, I didn't take all the foil out. I just kind of soldered the old foil back on to the wire. Let's see, that's all attached again. Now, sometimes when you're back soldering and picking up your project, you may find that a part will just fall out. And in a few minutes, I will show one of the yellow stones fell out when I was working. And you can tell where you're missing soldering because, up there it is, because it'll still be copper colored. So what I did there was I took it completely out, reamed it bigger with my solder iron, and then put little washers underneath it because I had to hold it up in the air now because the crystals made the whole project not as level and flat. So I put a bunch of washers underneath it, and that way it would hold it level to where I needed it, and I could put the new glass glob in place. I think those glass globs are for either plants or maybe fish tanks. Make sure that when you get your glass globs, that they're actually colored glass, not like painted on top. And you'll notice because the good ones that are actually a color glass that's been made into globs, the paint doesn't scratch off. I have bought some that looked really good, and then when I started heating them up with an iron, they started like crackling on top. It's like, oh yeah, that's just paint. That's not actually a green piece of glass. That's painted green. And then try to just get that brand. There's lots of brands are good. It's just you want to make sure that you've chosen one that works nicely. And now right now I'm tilting the whole thing and just making sure that there's no areas where I can see that the copper is still showing. And I'm also making sure that when I back solder, I will get globs sometimes on the front, and then I have to go through the front and knock off those globs. Now, when you're doing projects, you will get pieces of solder that just kind of fall off your projects. Keep that solder. And in fact, when you're doing something like this, it's often handy to just touch those little small pieces to do your project. And if you've noticed, the silicone that I put over the drafted array and used it as the surface of solder on, it really worked very nicely. I could put thumbtacks through it, and it really didn't hurt the silicone. And my array stayed nice and clean. So I can use it next time. So after I'm done with my project and I have washed it and scrubbed it with either hand soap or Dawn dishwashing detergent, I am now spraying it with patina. I use black patina, and these circles that I'm putting on top of it are made of shells. And so I have other things that I'm going to hang off of it. So I put them on the plastic at the same time so that when I spray one part of my my dream catcher, I would also get the other part done. So I put a light spray on it, and then I use an old toothbrush and just kind of scrub in, make sure that I've gotten all the parts I want. Right now I'm trying to scrape off some paper that's stuck to the solder when I was soldering without that silicone layer. And I was just doing it on top of my drawing, and some of it rubbed, like permanently adhered to the solder, but it came off. So that's where I'm using my old toothbrush and just mixing the patina into the project, making sure that it all gets in it. You don't have to use black patina. There's lots of different patinas you can use. I just like the look. So that's what I was planning on the whole time. And now I've attached the chains, some lobster claws on the chains to hang it from, and some shell feathers that I created. Those are those pretty abalone shells that I'm used. And you can see close-up details of my nice elephant dream catcher. Thank you for watching. I hope this inspires you. Please subscribe to my channel. Thanks.